So let's talk a little bit about philosophy, or rather, let's talk about what I consider to be deep down actually the most important course that I took at the university. If you don't know, that I actually happen to possess a degree in civil engineering, which I'm glad that I did for multiple reasons. I don't belong at all in the camp of people saying that education is a waste of time and money. It's all contextual and it all depends. Anyway, I'm not going to get into that discussion, but I am going to get into the discussion about philosophy and about that actual course. Not so much about philosophy, but rather what I was taught in that philosophy course. Basically, I'm going to preface this by saying that in my country, everyone who studies at some sort of university and will graduate with some sort of degree needs to take a course in philosophy. I don't know. Let's see. I don't actually remember the name of a course, but I believe it was something like Exum Philosophicum or some such. Literally, Exum in philosophy in Latin. We just called it Exphil. Really, that's what we did. Exphil, Exum Philosophicum, an Exum in philosophy. So I'm going to refer to it as Exphil. Anyway, so Exphil was being taught at various universities and with different angles. Some of the professors focus on the Greek philosophers. Some of them focus more actually on philosophy as a whole, and some focused on discussion and debate techniques. And I actually happen to study the latter of these items. Or it was like a heavy emphasis, a heavy focus on discussion and debate techniques, which I now see that it's so worthwhile. Because in this age of AI, in this age of smartphones, do you notice what people are doing when they're disagreeing? Instead of sitting down, side by or at a table opposite each other and discussing and debating and arguing their points and then listening to their opponent and then answering their opponent's points, not so much for the aim of destroying or ruining them, but rather to understand whence they're from. Think about that. If I say that, let's say, I don't know, let's take an example. Well, let's take a hot contested topic. Let's say, if I say that nobody should read the Epstein files, which at the time of this recording have just recently been released, and there's a lot of famous people and politicians and so on in my country that have a lot to answer for, it will look like. There's a lot of people who have allegedly, on the face of it all, supposedly, I'm not saying anything, they've had contacts and probably maybe received benefits from the late Epstein, which they obviously shouldn't have been doing. And that's also a discussion for a different time, it will look like. If I say that we should all anonymize those people, their names shouldn't be public, and you say, no, we need to know, the people have a right to know, we should understand, or everyone should know the names of those involved. And I say, no, there shouldn't be, because this is a matter of personal safety and security and so on. Everyone can make mistakes, but that doesn't mean that they should be litigated in front of the whole world years later and so on. And we go back and forth. Then I could use AI and I could look up various talking points that you're making, and I could focus on minute little details that you're leaving out, and I could throw it and lash it in your face, in a demeaning and insulting and derogatory tone, all to make you feel bad, which is pretty much what people are doing now. They're getting buried in the minutiae, and they disregard that the other party is directionally correct. Or I could, as I was being taught way back then, I could sit down and I could try and understand where you're coming from. Why are you thinking like that? If you insist on the names of the Epstein files being public, what makes you think that? Why would you think that? Why is that, in your opinion, better than having the names being concealed, like I want to do, and you do the other thing, and together we get closer to a mutual understanding based on our perspectives and backgrounds and attitudes and beliefs and knowledge, right? Maybe you know things that I don't. Maybe I know things that you don't. Maybe I was being taught things differently than you were. Think about that. And that's the main reason why we should sit down and try and understand each other. Instead of lashing out, throwing insults at each other, which people are doing all the time. Just look at the news media. The news media are lying about pretty much everything. That's my hot take for the day. Right? Whenever I open up an online paper or something, I assume that everything I read is pretty much horseshit and lies and half-truths at best. And that's actually quite sad. But that's the way the cookie crumbles these days. So in this regard, we're sitting down, we're discussing and we're debating and we're arguing, we're trying to get closer to a mutual understanding. There's a book named Getting to Yes, and I'm still undecided what I believe about that book, because it contains some good elements. But getting to yes doesn't necessarily mean that I should agree with you. I should only understand where you're coming from, right? Now, there are people who believe probably that the United States should bomb Iran. And there are other people like me who believe that the United States should not at all bomb Iran, right? And now I'm not going to get into a hot political discussion because the political climate is quite erratic these days. Everything is just erratic these days. Nothing is like it used to be. However, these principles are so important because imagine if Putin and Zelensky sat down and they actually took that approach. Where are you coming from? What made you invade my country? What made you decide to take this part of the country? What makes you not wanting to pull out your forces and so on? Where is this coming from? Did we do something wrong in the past? Did we threaten you? No, and yes, there's a lot of emotion going on here, and I can see how this could be falsely interpreted as me being pro-Russia, pro-Putin. I'm not pro anybody. I'm pro-peace. Let me just put it like that. I'm con war, I'm pro-peace. Should be pretty obvious. Speaking of which, I actually know a thing or two about walking around in war-torn territories. And I'll leave it at that. Anyway, if you sit down and you discuss with your political opponent, your opponent, and you try to understand where they're coming from, what makes them take this stance, what makes somebody vote Republican versus somebody vote Democrat, it's not as simple as it looks like on the surface of it. It doesn't need necessarily to be the presidential candidate. Maybe somebody would benefit more from a Democrat-run presidential administration in the US rather than a Republican-run one. Maybe. I don't know. Likewise, why are we electing a Democrat governor or a mayor? Or I don't know. However, if you extrapolate and you take that attitude and you then use that on your clients and your customers, what is the reason why you're buying from me? What makes you want to buy from me? Why are you coming to me instead of my competitor down the street? Why are you leaving me in favor of my competitor down the street? If you're running a restaurant, let's say, and you have a competitor, you both run Italian spaghetti pizza restaurants. Italian restaurants, okay, right? And you notice that sales start dropping, or that customers start leaving you for your competitor down the street. You should probably do some due diligence. Could it be that your food sucks? Could it be that your staff's rude? Could it be that you're overcharging? Could it be that they have something on the menu that you don't? Instead of starting blaming the customers, or even worse, instead of starting talking trash about your competition, which is just free advertising, you start asking your customers. You sit down and you ask them, listen, I'm part of the, I don't want to say rare segment, but I'm part of the segment that likes to go out and dine ever so often. And I'm telling you, if the general manager or restaurant owner would have sat down and asked me why I show up to the restaurant or why I choose not to show up, and then listen to me and then implement the changes that I suggested that they make or not, or keep everything status quo depending on my attitude, that would go a long way, right? So think about it. That's the type of conversation and persuasion that you need to implement in your business. Whatever sort of business you're running, you need to understand your customers, what makes them want to buy from you. And that'll be the persuasion lesson for this video. If you want to learn more about persuasion for business and sales, then get subscribed to my email list. The link to do so is in the episode description wherever you're watching and or listening to this, and I'll see you there.